Crowhill here. Today we review a homemade liqueur and discuss John Adams. Hello and welcome to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Good evening, Pigweed.
Good evening, Crowhill.
What's on your mind?
DC tourism.
Yeah?
So, it's just down the road.
Yeah.
And there's, you can't go anywhere without seeing the Washington Monument.
Right.
The first president.
Yeah.
Then the one of the most beautiful is sitting right on the water there is the Jefferson Memorial.
Sure,
That's
yeah.
Our third president.
Yeah.
Lincoln's down there. What is he, 15th or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
But why would they skip over...
Why'd they skip number 2?
Skip number 2, John Adams. So, I mean, it's not on the mall.
Yeah.
So, I went looking around and, I just got tired after a while. Where is the John Adams Memorial?
I think nowhere. I think there is not a John Adams Memorial.
There is not.
Yeah.
There is not. And it's not because he's like, there are plenty of presidents you can just gloss over and like, oh, yeah, he was that president for those years. Not John Adams. He's as important as any of the founding fathers.
Well, I think he was very important as a founding father, but as a president, he wasn't all that important.
Right.
Yeah.
So, is that where...
I think that's what it is, because he wasn't very popular because of the Alien and Sedition Acts and some other things that he did. And he only served one term and then got beat by Jefferson. So I think maybe there isn't a Adams
constituency.
Yeah, constituency out
like
there.
There is a Jefferson, and they went at it for a number of years.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get at this here, which is not a beer.
It's not a beer. It's not beer in conversation
but
today.
It is a homebrew.
It is homebrew. So what I've been experimenting with is doing various kinds of mixtures, sticking herbs and various things. And this one has a whole bunch of, you can see in the bottle there.
Yeah.
Here, let me show the people. There's all kinds of stuff in there.
Seaweed.
Everything. And the idea is to make something somewhat like Italian bitters. In other words, like Campari or Apero. That's the goal. And the question is, did I get close?
Let's see. It smells really good. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
It's got a lot of aroma, for sure. Yeah, actually.
So what are those floaties that are in there?
Yeah, so we've got orange peel, we've got rosemary, we've got roasted coriander, we've got hibiscus to give it a little bit of color, and then there's some sugar and some glycerin, actually, to give it a smoother mouthfeel.
Oh, okay.
And then it just uses grain alcohol to give it the alcohol.
It's just
alcohol.
Alcohol.
Just alcohol. So what do you think? It's
great.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah, I feel nice. And what is it down to proof wise? 40 proof?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was aiming for doing it just like a liqueur.
Uh-huh.
So it's 40 proof. So the next test is going to be, does it mix well with bourbon? Because when you make something like a oh darn it, what's the drink that's Italian bitters and sweet vermouth and bourbon. There's a name for that that's escaping me.
Right.
Anyway, it'll come to me later. That's something that I try from time to time. So, but I like it just as it is.
Yeah,
it's actually pretty nice.
And it's so right now. Did you keep it cold, or is it cold just from being in the car?
Yeah, pretty much cold from being in the car. Yeah.
But it's
pleasant temperature. Yeah, pretty good.
Very nice.
All right, so John Adams. Why are we talking about John Adams?
John Adams. Well, you'll find out, but not just yet.
Okay.
Let's get a little historical bio on him,
yep.
and then we'll get on it. So he was, a crafter of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. He didn't grow up particularly wealthy. He was from Massachusetts.
And apparently, from what I understand, when he was growing up, it was very common to spend time like in Indian households. Huh. That they would have, the Adams family would have Indians, come over to dinner, and they'd go over to dinner at the Indian family. So, there was a lot more cultural exchange going on between the settlers and the Indians at that time than you might think.
Oh, that's interesting. He went to Harvard. 16 or something like that.
Apparently, his mother was illiterate.
Yeah, he grew up in a house, that probably had a Bible and no other books, and not an educated, wealthy background.
Right.
But ended up with a scholarship to Harvard.
Yeah.
A formerly fine, prestigious college.
Yeah. Although in those days it was a pretty small affair.
Yeah, it was just a college. Yeah. And then got a law degree.
Yeah.
And I guess his first
big case.
His first big case was what?
He was defending. There was a movie made of Amistad, right? He was
no. Amistad had to do with slavery.
That was later. That was actually after he was president when he did the Amistad thing.
That was John Adams?
I think so.
Oh.
I think
I don't know. So this was the Boston Massacre.
Oh right, he defended the British soldiers.
Yes, nobody would defend him,
right.
And he actually got him. I don't know if he got him off, but got him off the hanging.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing is. Everybody's entitled to have a lawyer, which means somebody's got to be the lawyer.
Yes.
For even the...
You have to, yes.
The bad guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can't have a culture where, that guy is so horrible. Nobody
can defend him. Right.
Nobody should defend him. You're a bad person. Well, I mean, actually, there are plenty of lawyers who've lost jobs for defending Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's Ted Bundy, nobody's mad at you. But if
but the thing is, we have to have a culture where we respect even the worst is entitled to a fair trial, which means they have to have representation, which means somebody's got to represent them.
Got to do it, and it should be that way.
Yeah.
So anyway, and that because he didn't have he wasn't canceled afterwards. In fact, he was respected and. Went on to be just a very important dude.
He was the vice president to George Washington.
Yes.
And then...
Yeah, right, because that was back in the day where second place.
Yeah, second place was vice president. Isn't that weird?
I know.
Could you imagine that?
Hillary Clinton was vice president under Trump?
Oh, my gosh.
Right? It's just, I'm not sure how long that system lasted, but... anyway, so he did quite well, and he ran against... Did he run against Jefferson in the second?
I don't remember who he ran against.
And then lost to him after
He lost to Jefferson when, after his 4 years.
You're right.
He lost to Jefferson, but I can't remember who he ran against the first time around.
You're right. In 1796, Adams was elected as the Federalist nominee for president, and Jefferson led the opposition for the Democrat-Republican Party. So I was listening to somebody say that that he was a Federalist and that Jefferson was a Republican. I'm like, there was no Republican Party, but it comes to find out it was called the Democratic Republican Party.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So now that's another reason why there might not be an Adams Memorial, because there's no Federalist Party around to promote him.
Yes. Yes, and to that, he was a prolific letter writer.
Yeah.
And exchanged letters even after this very nasty. Apparently, this. If you
a nasty feud.
But if you think that nastiness in politics is a recent thing,
right?
This was the second election.
Yeah.
And it's considered one of the nastiest ever.
Apparently,
anyway.
Jefferson paid to have somebody dig up dirt and say scurrilous things about John Adams.
Exactly, right. So this idea that you pay for opposition research, that goes way back.
Yeah.
Jeez. And there's a cat.
And there's a cat. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
You might think of it as, or you think of arguments in general as something to be won.
Yeah.
And George Will was making the point that, no, this is the fight we're always having and should always be having.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
There are certain things that are always kept in tension.
Right.
And they should stay kept in tension.
Yes. I don't think of it as, gosh, we haven't resolved this thing yet.
Yeah.
No. The fight is the point.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, they continue. They continue to argue in a much more friendly way by way of correspondence. Up until the end, and what about their death?
It's pretty amazing.
It's ridiculous.
They both died on July 4th, 50 years after the Declaration
the
of Independence.
50th anniversary on the 4th of July.
And they both died on the same
the two most important founding fathers. Yes, your editor would say,
"Yeah, don't do that.
Come on,
yeah,
you just killed the ending.
Yeah.
That's too hokey,
too silly to believe that." Yes. Yeah, so that's just kind of an amazing story.
It is an amazing story. All right, so anyway, John Adams is a big deal. He doesn't have a memorial, but people are still trying to make him one, and
right.
we'll see where that goes. But that does not explain why we're talking about him today.
No, what we're talking about, John Adams, is a famous quote.
Just a famous quote. That's it.
Yeah.
And
so here's the heart of it.
Yeah.
Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And I'm going to back up just a touch and read a little bit more of the context.
Oh, okay.
We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. And then what I just said, our Constitution was made.
Okay. All right. So that was before that. All right. So what does he mean?
Yeah, what does he mean by that? So you have to ask.
So in that there, yes, there's no. You have to rely on the behavior of people. You can't just impose. Listen, all you communists out there, you can't just impose from on high a government that can compete with.
Or you can, but our government isn't strong enough to do that.
Yeah, well, that's the better point. Yes. Without a moral people, a self-restrained people, a government that was initially designed to be weak.
Yeah.
Because you either have a strong government and no freedom, or a weak government and freedom, and they were betting on. I don't know where they got this idea. Nobody had ever. It's been a long time since anybody thought that people could be left to their own devices and not lose it.
You know, one way to think about it might be the coffee pot at the office, where everybody, when you take a cup of coffee, you're supposed to put $1 in the coffee fund to buy more coffee, right? That only works if everybody's honest, and at least most people are honest, and put $1 in when they take a cup of coffee.
Right, because when the coffee runs out, if there's no money to buy
any more, then what are you going to do?
So look, we're all out.
Yeah. So the idea is it's a weak form of cooperation. We have this system, and the system is you take a cup of coffee. We're not going to check on you. We don't have cameras. We're not spying on you. And it relies on.
And we're not going to. Mandate money drawn out of your check each month,
right?
$4.
That's right.
No.
So the idea is, if you don't have people who are moral, religious people who are going to follow the rules, then you have to have stricter enforcement. Yeah. And he's saying that our constitutional government was never intended to have that kind of power.
Yes. And so why this is brought up, I see this brought up more recently, and why it has our attention, is because it does seem like we are growing less moral, and this...
And consequently, we're getting more and more regulations and more surveillance.
And spying, because we no longer expect anything from anybody.
Right. We don't trust people. So he says, I mean, if you're going to think of the implications of what he's saying, that if people are not bridled by morality and religion, our government doesn't have the power to contend with them. Our government doesn't have the power to restrain them.
Right.
And,
so which is his point that we're taking a chance here, and the only way this works is if we have a moral people. Now, this article, I read an opinion article that began with that quote.
Yeah.
And she says, in other words, the liberties recognized and protected in the Constitution depend upon the voluntary self-restraint of its citizens. And so I think what she's doing here is trying to take the churchiness out.
Yes.
Because you could read it as it only works with religious people who read the Bible and go to church all the time.
Yeah.
And so she just sort of substituted in, trying to maintain the same...
concept.
Concept by saying voluntary self-restraint, and I would also add civic-mindedness.
Yes, civic-minded. They have to be self-restrained. They have to be civic-minded, and they have to be law-abiding.
Yes.
And as long as you have those things, it doesn't necessarily have to be religious. But the idea is you have to have those things so that you can trust people, so that you can leave them alone.
Yes. Now, did Tocqueville's early observations were all of these voluntary civic organizations? You know, people would get together. Everybody in town would go to Farmer Brown's house.
Yeah.
You know, doing an Amish barn building.
Right.
You know, they each
or fix a road or something.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes. When you get a case where everybody is standing around going, you know, what's the government going to do for me?
Right.
And we had this civic mindedness, at least up through JFK's speech, until it turned into what the government is going to do for me, and the system doesn't work.
The system doesn't work where everybody is looking out for. Well, I think it was the Tocqueville. Who said that democracy will work until people realize they can vote themselves largesse at the public trough.
Yeah.
Once people realize that they can just vote for somebody who's going to give them stuff.
If 51% of the people say, "I'll vote for the guy that
gives me the most
stuff," well, then you're just you're in a spiral of doom until there's no money left.
Yes. So the situation that Adams is describing, it seems to me that you have a fork in the road. You can either say that we want to preserve our Constitution, and in order to preserve our Constitution, we need to preserve the United States as a place that's bridled by, you know, morality and self-regulation and that sort of thing. Or you can say we need to give the government more and more power.
Yeah.
Because you can't have a weak government with no power to control people who don't restrain themselves, and allow people to just go on like that. You either have to say, okay, in order to have the form of government that we have, we need to encourage civic virtue and
I saw somewhere you had Saddam Hussein written down. I'm like, where's he going with that? I see exactly where you're going with that.
Yes, that if you're not going to have common moral ground,
yes,
you need a Saddam Hussein.
Who was the leader of Yugoslavia before that thing broke apart?
Ooh.
So anyway, that guy was the heavy hand that held that thing together.
Like yeah.
You're
Right.
Yeah. Yes. So you know, if you want a brutal governance with secret police, because they all
that's
weren't
what you need.
Because they weren't on the same page.
Yes.
And so I think we are getting into the with multiculturalism and DEI, we're getting into an age of not being on the same page.
Yes.
And it threatens this loose system.
Yes, and let's get back to that article you were talking about. That what it really comes to, or the 3 points we were talking about: self-restraint, morality, and civic mindedness.
Yeah.
Okay, so as long as you have those 3 things, you don't have to agree on the deity of Christ, right? You know, you don't have to have everybody in the same church. You don't have to say we're only going to allow Presbyterians. What you have to say is, no, we're all going to agree on some basic moral rules.
Yeah.
We're all going to agree that we're going to live a life of self-restraint, and that we're going to help one another out. And if you have those things, then everything works. So the question in this, well, we're a melting pot, we should bring in everybody. Well, okay, is it going to undermine those 3 things?
Yes, as long as they're ready to get on board with these 3. Yes, the fact that they're of different ethnicities and skin colors.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with it.
That has nothing to do with these 3 things. So in that article, I would like to give the ladies some credit, but
you didn't print out that
page. She says, what we've been seeing, at least since the 1960s, is the abandonment of self-restraint. Our most significant cultural institutions encourage irresponsible behavior. The entertainment industry actively promotes immediate gratification, self-absorption, greed, envy, violence, sexual promiscuity, and substance abuse. The media amplifies and glorifies them, and the government subsidizes them. So she is saying this necessary self-restraint is very recently and very rapidly being abandoned.
Yes.
And abandoned for, I would say, we did that show on expressive individualism.
Right, yeah.
Where, the idea is or being my authentic self.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So if I subvert any of my urges, then I'm being inauthentic, as opposed to going, wait a minute, I'm a part of a society, I'm part of a community. Civic mindedness does not allow me to just, you're a conformist. Every commercial is, break away from the crowd, do your own thing, right? There's all this encouragement towards individualism, and yes, individualism as opposed to collectivism. Yes, America is very much pro that,
Yes.
but
Within
there's
a certain
pendulum.
structure. Yes, within certain understandings. And those understandings are, you're going to restrain yourself. You're not going to be going around messing with other people. You're going to obey the law,
Right.
and you're going to, participate in it, or at least not get in the way of civic organizations that help people. And, because, like, for example, the growth of the welfare state is because people are no longer taking care of one another.
Yeah.
If you have large families,
and it just multiplies itself.
Yes.
Right. So now we don't have to take care of Grandpa.
yeah. If you have a large family where Grandpa is going to live with the kids, and
There's three. Yeah. There's always going to be 3 generations of people around.
Yeah, and that they're going to take care of Grandpa. Then you don't need Social Security coming in to take care of Grandpa. So a lot of these things, as we lose the people taking care of themselves, then the government has to step in, and the government has to get bigger and more powerful.
Yes, or the government wants to step in. That's the problem. I think that they would rather say, look, how about this? Nobody needs to give any money to charity. Mm-hmm. You give it to the government,
and
we'll take care of that, and then because we'll make better choices about where that money gets spent.
So here's my reaction to that. I used to be in this church where there was some guy who needed some money. He was in a bad way and needed some money, and they were talking about, like, taking the money out of the church fund and giving it to this guy. And I said, no. What we should do is make an announcement. We have somebody who needs some help. Voluntarily give money to help this person, because you feel good when you do that, right? If you say, here's somebody who's in trouble, I'm going to voluntarily give money to help this person, I feel good about that. If you just take the money out of my back pocket and give it to that guy, I don't feel good about that.
You don't.
Right? So it's like nobody feels good about paying their taxes, but they do feel good about voluntarily helping somebody.
Yes, and like I said, it's sort of like once if there's a need that's been taken over by the government, then there's less people
involved. There's less civic involvement.
Right. So let's just say, when I was in the city, I can say anywhere you live, but in the city you have lots of other people's crap to deal with.
Right.
And so the houses are only 15 feet wide, the row houses, but everybody's got to sweep and clean up that little area in front of yours. And then you see, over in the subsidized housing, the government comes by and cleans all of that, and that doesn't
work.
And it doesn't help.
Right.
So we all know in the neighborhood, I got to pull the weeds out in front of my house. Oh, well, I lived on the end, so I had the whole side, but I got to shovel that. And
if there's an old lady 40 doors down who can't do it, somebody else comes over and helps her with it. Right?
Yes, you don't have somebody.
You don't say, let's call the public works department to come take care of this.
Right, or somebody not even doing that, just complaining that the government didn't come do it.
That's right. Yeah. So this idea is that you want people to be involved. You want people to be helping each other, and not like the government would be perfectly happy if everybody worked their job, sat around watching TV all day, and never did anything else, as long as they paid their taxes, and then the government took care of everything else.
Yes,
and that's not the American vision.
No, it's not. And this cradle to grave. I mean, it's just you get to socialism, which is just commie light, And then it's just like, well, wait a minute. Why do we even need money? Everybody works for the government, and the government gives you exactly what the government says they think you need, and then there you go. And you better, trust me, you better be happy about it.
That's right. Or because there's no other alternative. They're gonna take over. So it seems to me that what Adams was talking about, we've totally lost that vision of what America is supposed to be and what our constitutional form of government is supposed to be.
Yes.
Because now we don't. Like, for example,
which is why we're creeping into socialism.
Yes.
Is because we're asking the government to fill the gaps that would normally be filled by a moral, self-restrained people.
Yes. So you asked me whether a particular news story was relevant, which was the Speaker of the House, Johnson. Is that his name?
Yeah. So it was right. It was right when he became the Speaker, and he's being interviewed by a guy who's worried about him being too religious.
Yeah, and apparently Johnson had gotten together with some other people and prayed, and the guy from the news organization was saying, "Oh, we're worried about that with separation of church and state and all this other kind of thing."
Whoa! So this was his little quote here.
Okay, listen. Faith is a big part of what it means to be an American. When our founders set this system up, they wanted a vibrant expression of faith in the public square because they believed the general moral consensus and virtue was necessary to maintain this grand experiment in self-governance, which is just what we were talking about.
Very much so. And he's like, and then hold on, this is the part of it. Yeah.
Okay, the separation of church and state is a misnomer. People misunderstand it. Of course, it comes from a phrase that was in a letter that Jefferson wrote. It's not in the Constitution. And what he was explaining is that they didn't want the government to encroach upon the church, not that they didn't want principles of faith to have influence on public life. It was exactly the opposite. Now I agree with that, but I would modify it just a little bit.
All right.
We don't want the government encroaching on the church. We also don't want the church encroaching on the government, because the founders came from European, or at least knew about European governments where the church was dictating policy to the state. They didn't want that either.
Yeah, good
right.
point.
So the point is, we want moral, virtuous, faithful, religious people. We don't want the government to tell them how to run the church, and we don't want the church telling the state how to run things either. So there is a
but what he's addressing here is that there are too many dummies who think that this is a cornerstone of the Constitution.
Right, and it's not even in the Constitution.
It's not in the Constitution, and saying things like, well, we don't. The separation of church and state means that you can't bring your faith into the government.
Right, which is totally wrong.
Which is totally so. You remember we used to have religious tests, right? You know, in certain states you had to be a Catholic or Presbyterian to run for office or whatever.
Yeah.
Now it's gone where, I don't know if you remember Amy Cohen.
We have an anti-religious test.
Yes, Barrett. Mm-hmm. Right. They're basically saying if you're religious, you're disqualified from working in government.
Yeah.
Based on this silly misunderstanding of what church and state means. So, and we've also got to where, all right. You can believe what you want, but you can't live by those principles or speak about them.
That's right.
Or anyway, okay, so you
can
have
only be an idea that you have.
That's an idea that you have, and while you're at church, because you shouldn't even be sharing that with your kids at home, because that's not what this whole.
That's not what religion is. For one thing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. You can't talk about it, and you can't live by it.
Yes.
And if you do, you're unqualified to work for government.
Yeah, and that's a complete perversion of the whole idea. Obviously, we don't want somebody imposing Baptist theology on the country, and we don't want the government imposing, whatever it wants to do on the Baptist church.
Right.
But we do want, so soon the Supreme Court has from time to time addressed this question of civic religion and the idea of promoting civic virtue, like in God we trust and that sort of thing on the money.
Yeah.
And the idea is, no, that is very much part of what America is about. We do want to promote civic virtue. Now, as you said before, it doesn't necessarily have to be religion. It really has to just be civic virtue.
Yeah.
But this hostility that we have nowadays towards religion is gone way too far.
Ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, way
So
over
do
the
we
edge.
do now? Sinclair Lewis was like the early critic of suburbia. He was the John Cheever of the between the wars. So he wrote between World War One, World War Two, and he was from the Midwest, and he took a lot of shots at, you know, bourgeois, Midwestern, middle class values, and a lot at civic associations.
Okay.
Which is only to say, I'm not getting into Sinclair Lewis, but de Tocqueville talked about it. It was still a very, very big deal. I mean, everybody. You're either in the Democratic Club, the
Rotary Club,
you know, the Moose Lodge,
right,
whatever, and
Knights
they
of Columbus,
all
something,
have
yeah.
a civic mindedness, a volunteerism,
Yeah.
and it just seems like it was much more part of the fabric until until like she says, until the 60s, even up to John F. Kennedy. Can you imagine trying to sell that? Ask not what you do for your
Don't ask what your country can do for you. That's what everybody's asking all the time.
all the time.
That's what every
the farthest
election-
thing from the Democratic vision.
Every presidential election in my lifetime has been a contest between the two candidates over what will you promise that you're gonna give us. I'm going to give you this tax cut. I'm going to give you this tax cut.
Right.
Everything has always been, how can we give you more?
Yes,
and
when you feel, how about citizenship? Do we even every class just called, what your responsibilities are? Just,
right.
First off, civics.
Right.
Do they teach civics? Just like how the government works and
probably not. I mean, it's based on man on the street interviews. You'd think that they don't teach any of that kind of stuff because people don't know anything.
They don't. Yeah, they don't even know how many states there are.
Right. Or what's the country to the north, or anything like that.
Or anything really.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're teaching, but it's not. Yes. So
who won the Civil War? England.
Yeah. No. It's that bad.
Yeah, it is bad.
That's not the joke.
No, it's not a joke. Well, it is a joke, but it's not untrue. So I was thinking about an analogy to this question of how you need stronger and stronger rules when people are less and less self-restrained and moral.
Yeah.
Is email. Right? The more people are spamming you,
Yeah.
the more we need to have anti-spam laws.
Right.
Right? If people were respectful and decent, you wouldn't need that. You wouldn't need locks on doors, right? If people, like in some neighborhoods not too long ago, they really didn't have locks on doors. You didn't worry about that.
Yeah. You left your keys in the car, so you know where your keys are.
That's right. Yeah. So the idea is, the less moral people are, the more laws and the more enforcement you have.
Right.
To have.
I saw this great video of the guy who had lived much of his life in the city, and he says, "This is why I live in a small town."
Yeah.
And do you know those? So it's at a gas station convenience store where they have those shelves that are on wheels, so they're inside the bay. Then during the day they roll them out, and it's got oil and antifreeze.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? It was dark. It was at night, and the store was closed down. But all those things were still outside.
Right.
And he was like, "This is ever since I moved to a small town. This is why I'll never leave." And that right. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing. I saw another video just today. I don't know what this point this guy was making. He's at a ski resort. And he's got a selfie of himself with behind him are all the ski racks where people leave their skis and poles and everything while you go in and get a hot toddy or whatever. And he's like, "What's up with this? Leaving thousands of dollars worth of equipment out here? Yeah, that's going to go well for you. So you think you're being a smarty pants by pointing out the problem. Where's the problem?
Right. The problem
is you.
You're the problem. Because the fact of the matter is, people aren't going to steal this. That's just the understanding.
So in your mind, if it's not nailed down, it's going to get stolen. Okay, well that says about your upbringing, the neighborhood you live in, the kind of person you are, people you hang out with.
Right.
This was all about this. This revealed so much more about you than some point you're making about look at these dumb people leaving
Yeah. Now, I want to raise a slightly odd point here, which is
surprise.
When we talk about the fact that if you have a self-restrained, moral, civic-minded population, you don't need a whole lot of laws.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the immediate question is going to do, what are you going to do about crazy people? And because
Okay.
right, you have people who, even if you have, generally speaking, a self-restrained, reasonable population, you do have the nuts, right?
Sure.
And is it possible that we make such a big deal out of mass murders and, when crazy people go crazy, precisely to justify more government control? Is it possible that that's why those stories get promoted so much?
Well, the thing is, they're
sensational, of course. And
yes, but there's no news isn't a thing of its own. There are just events, and the media decides what's news.
Yeah.
And so,
are they trying to promote an idea that you can't trust your neighbor? We need more laws. Is that the yes? Maybe
it could be. I mean,
Yeah.
even if they don't. I mean, not that they're part of a deep state behind,
I don't think so.
but they're just all on the same page.
Yeah.
Of inching towards Gomorrah.
Yeah. All right. So, what we also have this other strange interpretation of Adam's quote. Do you want to get into that?
Sure, we got a couple minutes.
Okay. So this one struck me. I was listening to a Jordan Peterson broadcast, and we already talked about the quote from Adams. And then in this Jordan Peterson podcast, he reads this story from Revelation, book of Revelation, chapter 17. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. Now here's my paraphrase of Jordan Peterson's explanation of that.
Okay. Which is, it reads like a drug-induced nightmare.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So, but there are people who are able to glean out some.
Well, his whole thing is like taking dreams and things and trying to understand.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
So imagine the book of Revelation is trying to conceptualize the way things deteriorate before the ultimate disaster. The beast is a monstrous, centralizing state with multiple heads, aligned with the whore of Babylon. When things deteriorate to the point that destruction is likely, you have monstrous state-like apparatuses aligned with individual fragmentation down to the point of uninhibited licentious atomization. It's very Petersonian.
Yeah, yes.
But what I think is interesting about this is what we've been talking about is if you have a moral, self-restrained, civic-minded, law-abiding people, then the government is loose, right?
Yes.
But when you have this centralizing, powerful, multi-headed monster of a state, the people are the opposite. The people aren't moral and self-restrained. The people are like the whore of Babylon. They're living the high life. So you have this powerful, controlling state and a very immoral people.
Yes, and this immorality comes from this emphasis on the authentic self.
Yeah, I can do what I want.
Yes, fulfilling my needs.
Self-restraint's a bad thing.
Self-restraint is right. Self-restraint is conformity, is for losers.
Yes,
and the culture celebrates that.
Yeah. We have in front of us, by the way, the images from the hundreds of shows that we've done, and I just pointed to one of them that has a little image that says, "Only God can judge me."
Yes, people get this tattoo, and what are you talking about?
Right.
One, you probably don't believe in God. Number two,
the cop can judge.
Yeah. I'm sure everybody in your family judged you when you came in with that stupid tattoo.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. So, what's wrong with shame? What's wrong with stigma? What's wrong with all of these things? Now, if anybody receives any kind of shame, it's the shamer that gets shamed.
That's shamed, right?
It's like, how dare you slut shame? Was that slut shaming? Yes, she's a slut. She sleeps every guy on the first night. You're the bad guy for pointing that out.
Right.
So
But
so these things are going to go hand in hand as we become less moral, or if you prefer, self-restrained.
Yes.
Then we're going to require more oppressive government until we're just living in
until we get to the point of Revelation 7. Right. Okay, so I think John Adams had a good point.
He did, and so how many of those founding fathers, knew what they were talking about, and that's why we have the longest living Constitution, and that's why it doesn't need to be reinterpreted.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
There we go. Cheers.
We'll find that monument.
Thanks so much for listening to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Remember to visit us at pigweedandcrowhill.com or send us an email at pigweedshow@gmail.com.